Across the Mississippi River from modern St. Louis, a grass-covered pyramid rises 10 stories above the floodplain, larger at its base than the Great Pyramid of Giza, built entirely by hand, one basket of earth at a time. 10 stories high, 300 meters wide at its base, built between 950 and 1100 of the Common Era by a civilization that left no written records, only earth, bone, and shell. Cahokia, America's largest ancient city, at its peak around 1070 of the Common Era, it housed an estimated 10,000 to 20,000 people, more than contemporary London. And for decades, archaeologists assumed it was ruled by powerful men. Then, in 2019, researchers tested the DNA of Cahokia's most important burial, the two individuals at the center of an elaborate mortuary complex, long assumed to be two male warrior chiefs, turned out to include a woman. Ancient DNA extracted from 1,100-year-old bone, chromosomes read for the first time since the flesh decayed. And the answer that came back overturned everything. Not a consort, not a sacrifice, a co-leader buried at the absolute center of Cahokia's most elaborate mortuary monument with the full regalia of supreme authority. The study, published by Thomas Emerson and Kristen Hedman at the Illinois State Archaeological Survey, didn't just correct one burial identification. It unraveled 50 years of assumptions about how America's greatest pre-Columbian city was organized. Mound 72 is a small ridgetop mound at Cahokia, unremarkable from the surface. But beneath it lies one of the most complex mortuary deposits ever discovered in North America. When Melvin Fowler excavated it in the late 1960s, he found over 270 individuals, mass burials, sacrificial victims, and at the center, two bodies on a bed of 20,000 shell beads arranged in the shape of a falcon. Fowler's excavation was meticulous by the standards of his era. He documented the burials photographically and spatially, but one thing he got wrong would take 50 years and a molecular revolution to correct. 20,000 marine shell beads, each one hand-drilled, hand-polished, and placed to form the shape of a falcon in flight, the most sacred emblem of Mississippian authority. The falcon shape was the most sacred symbol in Mississippian cosmology, representing the warrior deity, the sky world, and supreme political authority. Whoever was buried on that bead blanket held the highest possible status in Cahokian society. In Mississippian cosmology, the falcon connected the sky world to the earth world. To be buried on a falcon was to be identified with the most powerful forces in the universe. The beaded burial wasn't just elite, it was divine. Fowler examined the skeletons and determined both were male. He described them as a paramount chief and his companion, two warrior leaders buried with the ultimate symbols of masculine power. For 50 years, the beaded burial became the foundation of how Cahokia was understood, a hierarchical chiefdom ruled by powerful men, supported by warfare, and maintained through ritual violence. Then the DNA was tested, and the foundation collapsed. The beaded burial became the single most reproduced image in Mississippian archaeology. It appeared in every textbook, every documentary, every museum exhibit, and every caption read, "Two male rulers." The two individuals on the beaded falcon blanket were not two men. They were a man and a woman. The skeletal sex determination from the 1960s had been wrong. Skeletal sex determination from fragmentary remains is unreliable, particularly when bones are poorly preserved, incomplete, or when the analyst expects a specific result. DNA doesn't guess. DNA reads the chromosomes directly, but the revision went further than the central pair. The team tested DNA from additional burials within Mound 72, and the results challenged the entire interpretive framework of the bodies surrounding the central burial. Those interpreted for decades as sacrificed warriors, DNA showed a mix of males and females, and several individuals placed in positions of apparent honor, previously cataloged as male or female. The team didn't stop at the central pair. They extracted DNA from dozens of Mound 72 burials, testing the sex of individuals across every burial context within the mound. The mass burial pits, those rows of bodies long described as sacrificed young women, also contained males. The gendered narrative of powerful men and sacrificed women was a projection, not a finding. The rows of bodies weren't all young women. They weren't all sacrificed concubines. The DNA demolished the gendered victim narrative that had shaped 50 years of scholarship. The original excavation in the 1960s was conducted at a time when Mississippian societies were universally assumed to be patriarchal. The excavators found what they expected to find: male rulers and female victims. The DNA showed reality was more complex. The pattern was consistent. Wherever the original osteological analysis was ambiguous, the DNA correction shifted the picture toward greater female presence. The bias had been systematic. A woman buried on a falcon-shaped bead blanket at the center of Cahokia's most elaborate mortuary complex changes everything about how we understand the city. The falcon symbolism, the 20,000 shell beads, the associated grave goods, all of it was shared between a man and a woman. Not male power with a female accessory, but shared authority expressed in the most sacred symbols available. Equal positioning, equal symbolism, equal burial investment. The bead blanket didn't distinguish between male and female. It encompassed both. Cahokia, at its peak, was a planned urban center, a grand plaza. Over 100 earthen mounds aligned astronomically, a wooden solar calendar marking solstices and equinoxes. This wasn't a village. This was a metropolis. A city this size required organization that most European settlements of the same era couldn't match: water management, food distribution, waste disposal, construction logistics. Someone was running all of it. At its height, Cahokia was larger than London and any European city of the same era, the largest settlement north of Mexico until the 1780s. And this metropolis, the DNA now suggests, may have been organized around female lineage. The evidence for matrilineal organization at Cahokia extends beyond Mound 72. Strontium isotope analysis of burials across the site reveals a striking pattern. High-status males were more likely to be non-local than high-status females. In a patrilineal system, a man's authority passes to his sons. In a matrilineal system, it passes through his sister to her sons. The difference isn't cosmetic. It fundamentally reshapes who holds power and how that power transfers. In a matrilocal society, women stay in their birth community and men move in at marriage. The isotope data matches this pattern. The women of Cahokia were local. The men came from elsewhere. The teeth don't lie. Strontium ratios are locked into enamel during childhood and never change. The women grew up here. Many of the men didn't. If the women stayed and the men moved, then lineage and the authority that came with it passed through mothers. Political power at Cahokia may have been inherited matrilineally, not patrilineally. The floodplain soil around Cahokia was among the richest in North America. Maize planted in spring could feed thousands by autumn. And the women who controlled that agriculture controlled the economic foundation of the entire city. This aligns with historically documented Native American societies in the region. The Osage, Quapaw, Ponca, and other Digihan Swan peoples, probable descendants of Mississippian populations, maintained matrilineal clan systems well into the colonial period. Among the Osage, clan mothers held veto power over war decisions and selected the chiefs who led them. Leadership was male in title, but female in origin. Women controlled maize agriculture, the economic engine that made Cahokia possible. The surplus from thousands of hectares of floodplain maize fields funded construction, supported craft specialists, and fed the ceremonies that held the city together. Thousands of hectares of floodplain maize, enough to feed 20,000 people and fund the largest construction projects in pre-Columbian North America. And the hands that planted it were overwhelmingly female. Control the food and you control the city. If women controlled agriculture and lineage determined authority, then Cahokia's power structure was fundamentally different from what archaeologists assumed for 50 years. The broader DNA evidence from Cahokia-era burials reveals a surprisingly diverse population. Another finding that challenges the old model of a homogeneous chiefdom. Cahokia's public life, the chunky games, the feasting, the ceremonies on the Grand Plaza, was organized around a social calendar that the matrilineal clans controlled. The spectacle was male. The organization was female. The ceremonial calendar followed the agricultural cycle. Planting ceremonies in spring, green corn ceremonies in summer, harvest festivals in autumn. Each event timed and managed by the matrilineal clans who controlled the food supply. Mitochondrial DNA from Cahokia burials shows diverse haplogroups. The city drew population from across the Mississippi River basin. Not an inbred elite, but a cosmopolitan center, attracting people from hundreds of kilometers away. Thousands gathered for ceremonies visible across the floodplain. Pilgrims arriving from communities that spoke a dozen languages. The genetic diversity confirms what the archaeology always suggested. The genetic diversity supports the model of Cahokia as a pilgrimage center, a sacred city that attracted followers from across the Mississippian world, and if women stayed while men arrived, the female lineages were the city's institutional memory. Strontium isotopes from teeth don't just reveal sex-based residence patterns. They show how far people traveled to reach Cahokia. Some came from over 500 kilometers away. The women were the institutional memory, the men were the newcomers, and the city's continuity, its rituals, its clan structures, its political authority, flowed through the female lines that never left. But here's the twist. The DNA that revealed female centrality also revealed the violence that surrounded it. And that violence doesn't fit simple narratives of either patriarchal oppression or matriarchal utopia. Mound 72 contained mass graves of people who were killed, likely sacrificed. Some were found in pits of dozens of bodies. Some showed signs of being alive when buried. The violence was systematic, ritualistic, and tied directly to the authority expressed in the central beaded burial. Some showed blunt force trauma. Others were arranged in rows suggesting simultaneous execution. The scale of ritualized killing at Mound 72 is unmatched anywhere in eastern North America. The DNA revision showed that both men and women were among the sacrificed. The violence wasn't gendered in the way the original interpretation suggested. It wasn't exclusively men killing women. It was a political and religious institution that claimed lives regardless of sex. The killing was public, ceremonial, performed at the base of mounds during events the entire city witnessed. It was woven into the same authority structure that placed a woman at the center of the beaded falcon. Some sacrificed individuals had non-local isotope signatures brought to Cahokia from distant communities to die. Whether war captives, tribute offerings, or volunteers remains unknown. But the practice was embedded in the same authority system that placed a woman at the center of Mound 72. Forensic analysis of the sacrificial burials shows a range of methods: blunt force, possible strangulation, live burial. The diversity of methods suggests the killing was ritualistic, not punitive. Female centrality didn't mean gentle rule. It meant a different kind of power, one that modern categories of patriarchy and matriarchy failed to capture adequately. Cahokia wasn't a matriarchal paradise. It was a complex society where female centrality coexisted with institutionalized violence. Power doesn't come in simple narratives. The figurine evidence from Cahokia had been pointing toward female importance for decades, but was consistently interpreted through a patriarchal lens. The so-called burger figurine, found near Cahokia, depicts a woman kneeling on the back of a serpent, hoeing into its body with a digging stick. Maize grows from the serpent's back. The image shows a woman literally creating agriculture from the body of the earth. Dozens of figurines from the Cahokia region depict women, not as decorative objects, not as fertility symbols, as actors, hoeing, planting, emerging from the earth, creating the agricultural world that sustained the city. For decades, this and similar figurines were classified as fertility objects, a diminutive category that reduced female cosmological power to reproductive biology. The DNA evidence now reframes them as representations of actual political and spiritual authority. Women with agricultural tools, women emerging from the earth, women giving life to maize. The imagery that archaeologists once dismissed as fertility symbolism now looks like political iconography. The DNA findings at Cahokia connect to a broader reappraisal of gender and power across the pre-Columbian Americas. The Mississippian artistic tradition is rich with female imagery. Shell, gorgets, ceramic vessels, stone figurines, all depicting women with authority, tools, and cosmological significance that archaeology systematically undervalued. In Peru, DNA revealed elite Moshe burials assumed male were female priestess, rulers. In Scandinavia, the Burka warrior burial, long presented as male, was confirmed female by DNA. The pattern is global. The bias wasn't conscious conspiracy, it was structural, baked into the discipline's founding assumptions, its training programs, and its analytical defaults. When faced with an ambiguous skeleton in a position of power, generations of archaeologists defaulted to male. Every ambiguous skeleton defaulted to male. Every position of power assumed masculine. DNA is correcting the record one burial at a time. DNA doesn't have gender assumptions. It reads X and Y chromosomes without cultural expectations. And every time it is applied to ambiguous high-status burials, the proportion of women in positions of power increases. The correction isn't limited to one site or continent. From Peru to Scandinavia to Cahokia, DNA reveals that women held power where archaeology assumed they didn't. Cahokia's decline adds a final dimension to the story. The city collapsed between roughly 1200 and 1400 of the Common Era, abandoning its mounds, its plazas, and its palisade walls. The causes remain debated: drought, flooding, deforestation, political fragmentation, and conflict all likely contributed. But the population didn't vanish, they dispersed. By 1400, the mounds were silent. The plaza was empty, the palisade walls had rotted, but the people who built them didn't disappear. They carried their social structures westward. Genetic and linguistic evidence connects the Cahokia diaspora to the Degihansuan peoples, the Osage, Quapaw, Omaha, Ponca, and Kansa, who migrated outward from the central Mississippi Valley during exactly this period. The migration wasn't collapse, it was transformation. The matrilineal clans that structured Cahokia restructured themselves across the Great Plains, adapting to new environments while preserving their social core. The Osage migrated west to Missouri. The Quapaw moved south to Arkansas. The Omaha and Ponca pushed northwest to Nebraska. Each carried the social structures that originated at Cahokia. These nations maintained matrilineal clan systems into the historic period. Their oral traditions describe origins in a great city by the river. Their social structures: clan mothers wielding political authority and selecting leaders. Mirror what the DNA reveals at Cahokia. Clan mothers selecting chiefs, women controlling granaries, agricultural surplus determining political power. What the DNA found at Mount 72, the Osage maintained for centuries after leaving the Mississippi. The descendants are still here. Their oral traditions preserved what Western archaeology took 50 years and DNA technology to rediscover: that women were central to the power structure of America's greatest pre-Columbian city. The Osage Nation maintains cultural institutions that preserve and teach the traditions that link them to their Mississippian past. The matrilineal structure that DNA revealed at Cahokia survives in living practice. 5 independent lines of evidence, all converging on the same conclusion: women weren't peripheral to Cahokia's power. They were foundational. The biggest mound in North America, the most elaborate burial in North America, and at the center of both, a woman whose authority was invisible to the men who excavated her. They assumed male power because they couldn't imagine anything else. The DNA imagined nothing. It just read the chromosomes. If you want to see how DNA is rewriting more of what we thought we knew about the ancient world, subscribe. Every assumption about the past is a hypothesis, and the molecules keep voting against the textbooks. The textbooks are being rewritten, not because ideology demanded it, but because molecules don't care about ideology. The DNA read what the bones couldn't tell us, and what the excavators refused to imagine. 20,000 shell beads, a falcon shape on the earth, a man and a woman at the center of it all, and 50 years of assumption that only the man mattered, corrected by a molecule that doesn't know what gender is supposed to mean. Somewhere beneath the mounds, more DNA is waiting, and every sample tested moves the story further from what we assumed and closer to what actually happened.